She trapped our son. The words hit me like a slap across the face. Right there, in the middle of my own wedding, Patricia's voice tore through the entire ceremony like a siren, loud enough to silence the string quartet, loud enough to make the flower girls freeze. Every single guest turned to look at her. Then they turned to look at me. And then, from the third row, someone stood up. I need you to understand something. That moment did not come out of nowhere. It was the end of a very long road, and I had been walking that road alone for a long time. My name is Celeste. I'm 34 years old. I work from home as a freelance medical transcriptionist. I sit at my desk, I listen to recordings from doctors and specialists, and I type what they say with total accuracy. It's not glamorous. It doesn't come with a fancy title or a corner office. But I built that career from nothing, and I'm proud of it. I grew up in a small house with my mom and my sister, where money was always tight and mistakes were expensive. I worked my way through community college. I saved for 6 years to buy my own condo at 29, a small place, but mine. When I met Daniel, I wasn't looking to be rescued. I was already standing on my own 2 feet. Daniel's family was different. Not wealthy in an outrageous way, but comfortable, established. His mother, Patricia, had opinions about everything, especially about who her son should love. From the very first dinner, I could feel her looking at me like I was something that didn't quite fit. I didn't have the right last name. I didn't go to the right school. I wasn't the woman she had already built in her head for her son. But Daniel loved me, and I loved him. And for 4 years, I told myself that was enough. I was wrong. If your partner's family has ever made you feel like you were never going to be enough, no matter what you did, subscribe to this channel right now. Drop your name in the comments and let me know you're here. You are not alone in this. Let's go. 2 weeks before the wedding, Patricia hosted a Sunday brunch at her house. I found out I was invited about 40 minutes before it started. A quick text from Daniel, "Mom wants everyone over. Come when you can." That was it. No real invitation. An afterthought dressed up as a welcome. I went anyway. I wore a nice blouse. I brought flowers. I smiled. We were barely through the appetizers when Patricia set a manila folder on the table and flit it toward me. The sound it made against the tablecloth was soft, almost polite. What was inside was not. "I hired someone," she said, folding her hands in front of her, "because I needed to understand who my son is really marrying." Inside the folder were printed photographs. Blurry ones, out of context. Screenshots of text conversations cropped so tightly that the meaning had been completely reversed. And a typed report claiming that I had deliberately gotten pregnant 18 months ago to secure my future with Daniel. I felt the air leave my lungs. 18 months ago, I had lost a pregnancy at 9 weeks. Daniel and I had not told anyone. We had grieved it privately, quietly, together. It was one of the most painful things I had ever lived through, and Patricia had turned it into a weapon. Daniel's brother made a low sound that might have been a laugh. Patricia's sister nodded slowly, like this all made terrible sense. Daniel sat completely still, his face the color of old ash. He said nothing. I looked down at the folder again, and something shifted in my brain. Because here is the thing about being a medical transcriptionist. You learn documents. You learn formatting. You learn the specific way different agencies and firms organize their paperwork. And what I was looking at did not match any licensed investigative agency I had ever seen. The margins were wrong. The header font was wrong. The report reference number was formatted like a template from a free online document builder. I had seen hundreds of legitimate documents in my career. This was not one of them. "Okay," I said. I closed the folder. I picked up my glass of water, and I did not let my hand shake. I knew exactly what I was looking at, and I knew exactly what I had to do. The next 2 weeks were a slow, deliberate campaign. Patricia was not finished with me, not even close. First, it was the seating chart. I found out 2 days before the wedding that my mother and sister had been quietly moved out of the main reception hall. Patricia had called the venue coordinator directly and submitted a revised chart, claiming it was a correction. My mother and sister were now assigned to an overflow room connected by a hallway. They would watch the reception through a wall. When I called the venue to fix it, the coordinator lowered her voice and said, Mrs. Hartwell called 3 times, ma'am. She was very insistent. I fixed it. I did not tell Daniel yet. Then came the rehearsal dinner. Patricia stood at the head of the table with a champagne flute and gave a toast that lasted nearly 4 minutes. She talked about Daniel's childhood. She talked about his accomplishments. She talked about the family's hopes and dreams for his future. She used the phrase, the life we always envisioned for him, twice. She never said my name. Not once. Not a single time. I sat at that table and smiled and felt every guest in the room try not to look at me directly. The night before the wedding, Daniel came to me with something tight in his face. Patricia had told him I had been in contact with an ex-boyfriend, secretly, inappropriately. She had even described specific dates. She had made it sound like evidence. "Is it true?" he asked. His voice was careful. That careful voice that meant he didn't want it to be true but wasn't sure it wasn't. I looked at him for a long moment. "No," I said. "It is not true, and I think you already know that." He nodded, but the doubt had already been planted, and we both knew it. I called my sister that night. I cried once, hard, for about 7 minutes. Then I stopped. I washed my face. I opened my laptop. And I got very, very quiet in that way. That means I'm not falling apart. I'm getting ready. What they didn't know was that I had been keeping records for 3 months. Every voicemail Patricia left me, where her tone shifted from sweet to threatening. Every text message where she told me I didn't deserve Daniel. Every email where she referred to me as the situation. I had saved all of it, named each file by date, organized into folders, backed up in 2 places. My transcription work had taught me one thing above everything else. If it isn't documented, it didn't happen. And I had made absolutely sure that everything happened on record. There was also a folder I had labeled simply legal. I had been adding to it for weeks. And the night before the wedding, I copied everything onto a small USB drive, wrapped it in a cloth, and tucked it into the inner pocket of my bouquet bag. I also thought about a phone call I had made 6 weeks earlier to a man I had never met in person, a man who had reached out to me first. His name was Mr. Aldridge. He had been the Hartwell family's estate lawyer for 20 years. He called me on a Tuesday afternoon out of nowhere and asked if we could speak privately. He told me he had been present at a meeting where Patricia had instructed him to restructure certain assets in a way that would legally protect Daniel's inheritance from any future spouse. He said he had carried out the revision because he was instructed to, but it had bothered him, quietly, for months. "I've watched this family for a long time," he said, "and I've never seen anything like what's being done to you." We met at a coffee shop near his office. I brought my documentation. He confirmed that the PI report was not produced by any legitimate agency he recognized. He said he knew someone who could verify it formally. And when I asked him if he would be willing to be present at the wedding, just in case things went the way I thought they might, he didn't hesitate. "I'll be there," he said. Meanwhile, Patricia had grown visibly relaxed. I could see it in the way she moved through the rehearsal dinner, the way she laughed a little too easily. She had told her sister, loud enough for the caterer to overhear, "She'll fall apart before the vows." She believed she had already won. She believed that doubt and exclusion and public dismissal had done their work. She thought I was already broken. The morning of the wedding, Daniel was quiet, distant. He kissed me on the cheek and told me I looked beautiful. But something behind his eyes was still holding back. I walked toward the ceremony, not knowing if he fully believed me. I walked anyway. The ceremony started beautifully. Sunlight through the tall windows, roses and deep burgundy lining every row, the smell of fresh flowers and warm candle wax and something like hope. The officiant's voice was calm and steady as Daniel and I stood facing each other at the altar. We were in the middle of the vows. Daniel was looking at me with that expression I had fallen in love with. That open, unguarded look when I heard the chair scrape. "She trapped our son." Patricia's voice cracked across the room like something breaking. She was on her feet, pointing at me, her face flushed deep red. "This whole wedding is a lie. She manipulated him. She tricked him into this." The string quartet stopped. The guests froze. One of the flower girls started to cry softly. I could feel every eye in that room pressing into me like weight. And then someone else stood up. Third row, left side. Renee, a woman I had heard about but never truly feared. Daniel's ex-girlfriend from years ago, the one Patricia had always kept in her orbit, the one she had invited to this wedding over my quiet objection. Renee stood up slowly, and for one terrible second I thought it was over. Patricia asked me to come here today, Renee said. Her voice was steady, calm, nothing like what I expected. She told me to stand up at some point and say that I still had feelings for Daniel, that I always believed we were meant to be together. She paused. I'm not going to do that. The silence in that room was the loudest thing I have ever heard. Because none of that is true, Renee continued. And because what this woman is doing to Celeste is wrong. I have watched Patricia manipulate this situation for months. I should have said something sooner. I'm saying it now. Patricia's head snapped toward Renee. You were supposed to, she started, and then she stopped, her mouth closed. Too late. From the back of the room, Mr. Aldridge stood. He walked forward, slowly, deliberately, the way a man walks when he has nothing to hide and everything to say. He introduced himself to the room in a clear voice. He stated that he had documentation proving the private investigator report presented to me 2 weeks ago was fraudulent and fabricated. He stated that copies of this documentation, along with recordings of Patricia's threatening communications to me, had already been submitted to the appropriate parties. I reached into my bouquet bag. I found the USB drive by touch. I walked the 3 steps between me and Daniel, and I placed it in his hand. Everything your mother told you, I said quietly, and everything she didn't want you to know. It's all there. Daniel looked down at the drive in his palm. He stood very still. I watched something move across his face. It started as grief. It moved through confusion. It settled into something clear and certain and final. He looked at his mother. We're done here, he said. The wedding continues. Patricia's own husband stood up. He touched her arm. She shook him off once. He took her arm again, gently, and guided her out of the row. He did not look back at her as they walked toward the exit. He did not look angry. He looked tired in the way a person looks when something they have known for a long time has finally been said out loud. The doors closed behind them. The officiant looked at us both. He cleared his throat softly. Shall we continue? Yes, Daniel said. Please. We finished our vows in a room that was completely quiet, except for the occasional sound of someone trying not to cry. My mother and my sister, who were now seated in the front row where they belonged, held each other's hands. My sister mouthed something at me that I couldn't read, but I understood. It wasn't the wedding I had imagined. It was smaller somehow, and rawer, and more real than anything I had ever planned. Daniel held my hands through the rest of the ceremony with a grip that said more than any vow could. He wasn't holding my hands like a groom at a perfect wedding. He was holding them like a man who finally understood exactly what was standing in front of him and was not going to let go. In the weeks that followed, the fraudulent PI report became the center of a civil dispute. Patricia's credibility within the family fractured in ways that I don't think she ever recovered from. The relatives who had nodded along at that brunch went very quiet. Daniel's brothers stopped returning her calls. I did not feel triumphant. I felt something closer to relief, and something closer to grief for the version of this that should have been easier. But here is what I know. I stayed. I documented. I found the right people, and I told the truth, and I let it do what it needed to do. Patricia tried to build a story where I was the trap, where I was the deception, where I was the thing that didn't belong. She tried to make me look like a trap, but I was never the trap. I was the door she should have been afraid of opening. If someone tried to destroy your relationship by making you look like the villain, you know exactly how I felt in that room. Subscribe and tell me your story in the comments. Were you ever accused of something you didn't do by someone who was supposed to welcome you? Were you ever made to feel like the problem when you were the one being targeted? Let's talk about it. Click hype to help the story reach everyone who has ever been blamed for loving the wrong person's child. Standing up for yourself is tough. If you've been there, subscribe and become part of our community. Let me know the story helped by clicking hype and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel.